Hey guys, how you going? Hey guys, you worried about the effects of 5G radiation? Well, let me introduce you to the affiliate of this video. They're called EMF Harmonized, and they filter out the harmful RF waves that actually damage our DNA. Kids are also more susceptible to the RF waves than adults are, and what they do is EMFs clump together red blood cells and cause lots of problems. This technology prevents that. And as you can see, they have products for your phone, your tablet and your computer, as well as your body. You can actually buy these for your body. So if you'd like to help a fellow truther and help me out as well, please check out the affiliate link down below. They also actually have a video showing you the red blood cells, how they clump together with 5G radiation, and how this technology protects you from that. Okay guys, if you're interested, check out the affiliate link below. Thanks guys. Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about a cold case, something different, and it's Mr. Cruel. Okay, how could one describe an attacker who would abduct a child from their home in the dead of night in any other way than cruel? Even if one could look past the heinous actions demonstrated towards the child victim, imagine the anguish the parents would experience in their inability to protect their child or fear of never seeing them again. A profiler would suggest dubbing this man as a cruel individual may be counterproductive to the investigation, but a human being may find it perfectly fitting. Now, most of this is going to be speculation, because I don't think anybody knows who this person is, and how could you from the picture? It doesn't leave much to go on, does it really? In the 1980s, what is considered today as the world's most livable city of Melbourne fell victim to a notorious child attacker that would later become known as Mr. Cruel. He would strike in the still of night, I can't say a certain word guys, abducting children to commit his twisted fantasies before abandoning them in obscure locations. Using military-like precision, he would enter the home and steal a child right from their bed. Today, however, this series is remembered for its horrifying and tragic conclusion. All one can do now is wonder. Wonder who he was, where he is now, how has he been able to get away with such crimes? Perhaps we will never know, but like the age-old saying goes, anything is possible, and like the X-Files slogan, the truth is out there, all we have to do is find it. Finding the truth provides closure to the numerous victims and an identity to a notorious child killer. The Victorian Police have withheld much of the information about this case, including number of offences this man is believed to be responsible for. So all one can do is use the information at hand to develop their own beliefs about the case of Mr. Cruel and where he might be now. On the 22nd of August 1987, in the outer Melbourne suburb of Lower Plenty, a family was fast asleep in the early hours of Saturday morning. The serenity and safety of their home was about to be shattered by the intrusion of a balaclava-wearing burglar. Entering through a lounge room window, the man entered the parents' bedroom. Brandishing a small handgun and a large hunting knife, he bound the parents using a specialist-style knot before gagging them and making his way into the children's room. Upon his arrival in the children's bedroom, he bound, gagged and blindfolded the 6-year-old boy who lay peacefully on his bed. Now he could finally turn his attention to his true motive for entering the home. The 11-year-old girl who lay innocently on the bed adjacent to her brother. Despite his future moniker, he remained calm, cool and collected throughout the entire event. in claiming gratification from the young girl. His degree of self-control reached such limits that he took the time to steal food from the cupboards and prepare himself a meal while the family lay helpless in the presumed sanctuary of their own home. In what would later become part of the offender's established modus operandi that would link all of these crimes together was the offender establishing false leads in his offences. In this particular event, the offender took the time to place what would later be established as a fake phone call where he threatened another family with similar violence. Okay, so far we have military precision, a specialist in tying knots, and he knows to throw them off. This particular aspect of the offender's behaviour would become part of the behaviour that police used to identify the fact they were dealing with a serial offender. This offence would serve as the only confirmed beginning of the series of crimes committed by this offender. Despite speculation to the contrary, this served as documented beginning of Mr. Cruel's reign of fear, as Victorian police have kept information regarding many of the offences a closely guarded secret. Okay, that's something else. I would wonder why Victoria Police would do that. Why would they not release a lot of information? Like, there are reasons why you wouldn't release information, but this was 1988. I would think that there would be some information they could release. Anyway, okay, December the 27th, 1988. Over a year had passed since the suspect had last been heard from, albeit unbeknownst to investigators at the time. A man entered a property in the suburb of Ringwood and abducted 10-year-old Sharon Willis straight out of her bed. First entering the parents' room and placing a small firearm to her father's head and steadfastly warning him with the words, "Don't be a hero." Don't be a hero. I've heard that somewhere before. In a letter, John Benet Ramsey. He bound her parents in the same manner as his previous assault, using specialist knots and gagging them with surgical tape. Okay. Specialist knots and surgical tape I would also take a note of. Upon completion of his restraint of the parents, he indulged in the signature of creating false lead as he stole approximately $35 from their bedside table in an attempt to give the impression that this was simply a routine burglary. Then proceeding into the children's bedroom, he woke... I don't see how that's going to happen when he's taking a child. It's not just simply a routine burglary. I think they would start putting it together. Then proceeding into the children's bedroom, he woke the young victim using her name. Police would later speculate that he may have seen a photo in the newspaper some months prior in a story about their home catching fire. After restraining the young girl, he lifted her straight out of her bed and into the night. When the parents eventually managed to struggle free, they became confronted with the cruel reality of what would be any parent's worst nightmare. I couldn't think of anything worse. Their daughter had been carried off by what was apparently a simple burglar. Distraught and overcome with panic, the father attempted to call the police, only to discover the intruder had cut the phone line. Forced to run to their neighbours to contact police before running around the neighbourhood looking for their daughter. The Willis family underwent an excruciating 18-hour wait before their daughter was found abandoned, walking along the side of the road not far from her home. Dressed in garbage bags, a passing motorist took her back to their home so she could contact her parents to let them know she was safe and sound. Despite undergoing a torturous ordeal, she appeared to show remarkable resiliency for a girl her age and gave police a good portion of information about her abductor. However, only one type of information was unable to ever be found. The offender appeared to have an intimate knowledge of forensic science, in that he was meticulous in eliminating any potential material that could have led investigators back to him. Okay, so not specialist. He was using, did they say surgical tape? And someone, they believe, with knowledge of forensic science. Very interesting. Brushing and flossing their teeth, hand washing his victims, and even clipping finger and toenails to remove any potential DNA he may have left on his victims. Somehow I understand maybe why Victoria Police didn't release all the information. Is there a reason for it? Who are they protecting? Being blindfolded for the entire 18-hour ordeal prevented Sharon from being able to ascertain a physical description of her attacker. Still, she managed to describe his actions in great detail. Despite his notorious moniker, Mr. Cruel appeared to care for his victims by feeding them and was often a gentle and quiet-spoken individual. Okay, there's more that stands out. I wonder if this person has some relation to being a doctor or surgeon or forensic or... Interesting. After this assault, Mr. Cruel became somewhat of a modern-day boogeyman as a climate of fear began to dawn upon the city of Melbourne. Children and parents alike were afraid that any one of them could be next, and unbeknownst to the public and law enforcement at the time, this was only the beginning. July the 3rd, 1990. On what is one of the most prestigious and exclusive stretches of property in Monomeath Avenue in Canterbury lay a predator who'd been dormant for almost 2 years. Lurking in the shadows of the Linus family home was the man who made headlines almost 2 years prior for his abduction of Sharon Willis. All the while, 13-year-old Nicola Linus and her sister lay unsuspectingly asleep in the apparent sanctuary of their home. Near the stroke of midnight, they awoke to find a masked intruder standing over them and barking instructions at them. Whilst restraining her sister, the suspect ordered Nicole to return to her room and collect her school uniform. A peculiar request, one might think, but this act would later give police a link to a possible suspect. Still brandishing a hunting knife and a handgun, the suspect whispered to Nicola's bound sister that it would cost her father $25,000 if he ever wanted to lay his eyes on his daughter again. But like the Willis case, one can only assume this was simply another false lead planted to keep the police off his trail. If this were a real ransom, the suspect failed to leave behind the most important detail of all in how it would be collected. Despite the father's apparent willingness to pay the amount demanded, he had no instructions to follow for the return in his daughter. Escaping in the family car, the suspect took Nicola and drove approximately 1 kilometre away from the house, where it can only be surmised that he had his own vehicle waiting. From there on, he vanished into the night like a ghost. A ghost may be the best way to describe this man, just like in the Wills case. Not a single witness was ever found by the police. Almost half an hour later, Nicola's parents returned home, shocked by the front door being wide open and the empty driveway. They hesitantly entered their home to find one daughter still laying bound and gagged on her bed and the other missing. Originally from England, the Linus family moved to Melbourne through the father's business, as they felt it to be the safest place to raise children. That picture of a tranquil and safe environment was shattered in less than half an hour. Some may say it was sheer luck that police gained almost no evidence from their later examination of the crime scene, but to others it simply served to further the reality of how difficult it would be for police to capture this offender. During a press conference, Nicola's father declared his willingness to negotiate the ransom for his daughter's release. But again, like the Willis case, it was simply a ruse. The only information investigators managed to gather on the case was that which was given to them by Nicola herself, who left an impression on these skilled professionals. She was found abandoned in the suburb of Kew, next to electricity substation, approximately 50 hours after she was taken. She managed to make her way to a nearby house and call her father to relieve him with the news her family had been praying for, that she was safe and alive. During her later interviews with the detectives of Operation Spectrum, the task force established to identify and catch Mr. Cruel, she would provide some of the only known information about where Mr. Cruel would keep his victims and various mannerisms that would help identify a suspect. Unfortunately, however, to this day, he still remains unidentified. Once investigators were certain they were dealing with the same man responsible for the abduction of Sharon Wills, and the assault on the 11-year-old girl in Lower Plenty years prior, they were certain of one thing. There was a serial offender on their hands. But one of the few things they could be sure about was that his offences were escalating. He never attempted to abduct the 11-year-old girl, and Sharon Wills was taken for only 18 hours. Now Nicola Linus has been taken for approximately 50 hours. Not only did he appear to be perfecting his craft, but he was also losing the battle to control his sinister and vile urges. The time between each offence was decreasing, and the time each young girl was held in a torturous confine by this man was only getting longer. It was considered to be only a matter of time this man would return and strike again. But when he does, it will result in one of the biggest and most remembered tragedies in the history of Melbourne crime. April the 13th, 1991. Success in life does not come easy in any aspect if you wish to find it. The case of the Chan family was no exception. John and Phyllis Chan worked long hours in their popular Eltham restaurant, which happened to be one of 3 they owned, along with property investments that were acquired through countless hours of hard work and dedication. Starting at 7 o'clock in the morning and finishing at midnight had almost become part of their daily routine. But despite the long hours, they were able to provide a comfortable life for their 3 daughters. They lived in a secluded luxury home in the suburb of Templestowe in the northeastern area of Melbourne. One would think that this would provide the family with an escape from their busy lives on the far side of the high fences of their home. However, on a fateful autumn night, while their eldest daughter, Carmine, would be engaging in her regular habit of looking after her 2 younger siblings, the same tragedy that befell the Wills and Linus families in years prior would strike again for a third and final horrific time. In the early hours of Saturday night, the masked predator, who had been haunting the city of Melbourne for many years now, engaged in what is considered the last of his heinous crimes. Little did we know at the time that this single event would end as one of the saddest tales to befall the city of Melbourne. Disturbing the young girls as they walked down the hall towards the kitchen, Mr. Cruel forced the sisters back into the bedroom where they'd been watching television. Forcing Carmine's two younger siblings into the closet and placing their bed up against it, trapped them inside. He then turned his attention to Carmine. After telling his sisters, trapped in the closet, that he only wanted money and that they would all be left unharmed, he took her at knife point from the home, approximately 200 metres down a suburban street, unnoticed, to where one can only conclude that he had a getaway vehicle parked. Not long after their sister had been taken, the 2 girls were trapped in the wardrobe, managed to free themselves and contact their parents, who were still unsuspectingly working hard at their restaurant in Eltham. When police would later arrive, they were greeted with the signature of the Mr. Cruel, spray painted on the side of the family car in big white letters read, "Payback Asian drug dealer, more and more to come." But of course, like any investigation, detectives had to follow this lead just in case there was a drugs involvement in the crime. That avenue, of course, proved fruitless, as Mr. Chan turned out to be as clean as any upstanding member of the community could be. This left no doubt in their minds, as Mr. Cruel had returned. When members of Operation Spectrum arrived at the scene, they were greeted with any investigator's worst nightmare. The original officers who were first on the scene failed to secure the home and establish it as a crime scene for forensic examination. So in those crucial first hours, there had been countless individuals walking through the home and potentially contaminating and destroying evidence that may have been able to finally identify a suspect. Again, this is not the first time this particular thing has happened. It does happen just through error, but again, it reminds me of the John Benet Ramsey case, in which the original officers who were first on the scene failed to secure their home. And so in the first hours, there were countless individuals walking through the home and potentially contaminating and destroying evidence. Okay, let's continue. Still, despite all the horror surrounding Carmine's abduction, there was a slight glimmer of hope. Knowing Mr. Cruel had released all of his previous victims, The Chan family was hopeful their daughter would eventually come back to them despite her traumatic ordeal. They even gave a highly emotional press conference pleading for the return of their beloved daughter. That could move even the most stoic of personalities. Since the beginning of his reign of terror, the task force and its investigators had worked with the previous victims in Sharon and Nicola to develop some solid evidence about their abductor. Both told detectives hearing what they assumed were plains land, which led police to investigating approximately 3,000 homes under the flight paths leading to Tullamarine Airport in suburbs as far east as Lower Plenty. One of the most chilling details of all occurred, however, when it was realised that Carmine Chan attended the same school as Nicola Linus in the form of Presbyterian Ladies' College. An all-girls school located in the suburb of Burwood was thrust into the public eye as many began to speculate the offender might currently be employed within the Victorian school system. Despite all of these leads, however, they were unable to put a name to the phantom that was holding a city captive through fear. Time continued to pass without a single sign that their daughter was coming home. Carmine's desperate mother even offered a reward to the kidnapped for the return of their child, but she was still greeted with nothing. Hours turned into days, days to weeks, and weeks into months, without any communication from the kidnapper or any indication of Carmine's whereabouts, despite one of the most extensive manhunts in the history of Australian crime. On April the 9th, 1992, answers would finally be found, however, when 4 days short of a year after the abduction, Carmine was finally found. A man walking his dog stumbled across a skull in the suburb of Thomastown whilst out walking his dog. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a completely decomposed body amongst the long grass adjacent to Edgar's Creek. The man quickly returned home to notify police of his horrific discovery. Upon their arrival, all that could be determined was that the victim had died from gunshot wounds to the head. The coroner would later make the determination that there were 3 individual gunshot wounds to the skull. But that's not all a forensic examination would ascertain. The answer the Chan family desperately sought was about to arrive, but in the most tragic form anyone could possibly imagine. Further analysis of the remains led investigators to discover that they had found Carmine Chan. The remains found by the creek in Thomastown were that of a young girl abducted almost a year prior from her family home. Although the family finally had a resolution in what happened to their daughter, and the pain of not knowing could now subside, they were left with another series of questions, perhaps even more painful. Why did he kill her? What might just be the most prevalent of all questions raised by this tragedy? He returned all of his other victims. What made her so different? One can only wonder until the day he's finally unmasked and brought forward to face the justice he so rightfully deserves. To this day, investigators still work this case, and Victoria Police have promised the City of Melbourne that this case will only be deactivated when the man dubbed Mr. Cruel is finally identified and convicted. Okay, so as we know so far, he picks on young girls, and he went from just abducting them to the murder in the end. And there have also been other assaults that have been linked to the same perpetrator, but I'll read some of these, and you can see what I can see. Okay, number 1, the abduction and assault of a 14-year-old girl in Hampton in February 1985. Number 2, the abduction and assault of a 14-year-old boy in Hampton in July 1985. Number 3, the assault of a 30-year-old woman in her Warrandyte home on 4th of December 1985. An assault of a 30 or 35-year-old woman in her Donvale home on the 6th of December 1985. Number 5, the assault of a 34-year-old woman in her Bulleen home on the 7th of December 1985. Number 6, the assault of a woman in Greensboro in March 1987. Number 7, the assault of a woman in Greensboro in August 1987. Number 8, the assault of a 48-year-old woman in Moonee Ponds on 10th or 11th November 1987. 9, the assault of an unknown victim in Hawthorne between 1985 and 1987. 10, the assault of an unknown victim in Brighton between 1985 and 1987. 11, the assault of an unknown victim in Caulfield between 1985 and 1987. And 12, the assault of an unknown victim in Dingley between 1985 and 1987. Okay, I would put the younger ones down to it, but maybe, I don't know about the older ones, but let's have a look at each individual story. Let's analyse what has been said about these attacks in the media and who has linked them to Mr. Cruel over the years. The assault of a 14-year-old girl in Hampton in February 1985 was first linked to the perpetrator known as Mr. Cruel by writers John Sylvester and Andrew Rule in their 2008 book Rats, Crooks Who Got Away With It, Tales of True Crime and Mystery from the Underbelly Archive. The co-writers wrote only briefly about this attack, stating police had been looking for a man they called the Hampton attacker, who they suspected abducted a 14-year-old from her home in February 1985. They believe the same man was responsible for attacks in Caulfield, Hawthorne, Brighton, Dingley and Donvale. He was an opportunist who would break into houses looking for money, but who would assault his victims if he had the chance. The Hampton attacker was believed to be the same man responsible for later attacks, including Carmine Chan's. Much later, after thousands of hours of fruitless investigations, police were to conclude there were probably 2 offenders, possibly one a copycat. While some of the Hampton assaults had striking similarities to the latter one, police finally established that the first known attack by Mr. Cruel was in Lower Plenty in August 1987. One confusing point about this information is that Sylvester and Rule's book suggests that police later ruled out the earlier attacks after thousands of hours of fruitless investigations, yet this contradicts Keith Moore's later information that some detectives did indeed consider at least 2 of the 1985 attacks in Hampton as being the work of Mr. Cruel. Yeah, the first 2, the 14 or 15-year-old. Furthermore, this is the only source on public record that has ever attributed attacks in Hawthorne, Caulfield, Brighton and Dingley as being possibly the work of Mr. Cruel, and nothing more is known about any of them. The Donvale attack referred to must be the same one mentioned in contemporary newspaper articles as that of the attack of the 30 or 35-year-old woman in December of 1985. There was a scared and scarred schoolgirl. The assault of the 14-year-old girl in Hampton in February 1985 was also linked to the perpetrator known as Mr. Cruel by journalist Keith Moore. In his article for the Herald Sun, Mr. Cruel suspected of at least a dozen attacks on children dated 12th of April 2012. In the article, Moore stated one of the incidents police believe may have been one of the first Mr. Cruel attacks involved a 14-year-old girl who was abducted from her Hampton home in 1985. She was tied, gagged and blindfolded before being driven to a vacant building site and assaulted. The scared and scarred schoolgirl was dumped at a nearby Moorabbin Bowl on the Nepean Highway at 2:10 a.m, nearly 5 hours after being kidnapped. The 1985 survivor in her statement believes the assailant had left behind evidence and swabs were taken. I cannot find any reference to this crime in any major Melbourne newspaper nor any local newspaper from the time period. Another reference I found to this crime was in Adam Shan's documentary Australia True Crime Stories Season 3 Episode 7, which appeared on the 9 Network in 2019. Which I wouldn't necessarily believe. I would like more information, and the Victorian Police should release more if they've got more information on this. It's been 30 years, over 30 years, so let's, maybe the public can help, because some of the public are quite good little detectives. Okay, as mentioned earlier, Mr. Cruel could be connected to up to 12 assaults. I've spoken at length to Mr. Cruel's first documented victim from 1985, but understandably she doesn't want to talk on camera. But she did relay what he said to her during the assault. "My liberty, my freedom is more important than your life." Well, libertarians and people who are wanting freedom don't go around killing other people or hurting other people. And that's not how you get liberty and freedom. Okay, this is very telling when viewed through the lens of Carmine Chan murderer. In the mid-1980s, DNA testing was in its infancy, and poor forensic work in the early days dramatically impacted later investigations. Then the scene then cuts to an interview with Keith Moore, who states quite a lot of the original witness statements from 85, 86, 87 that David Sprague desperately wanted were never able to be found. In one case, I think it was his first victim, had been tied up. The rope was retrieved, but the rope had been put into a plastic bag. Whilst he got very good at covering his tracks, common sense suggests you don't start off that good. If he was ever going to make mistakes, it would have been in those early days. That rope could have had DNA on it, and the Spectrum Task Force were mortified when they couldn't find the rope. The documentary then cuts to a visual of a plastic bag marked with the title "Police Evidence" and a hand belonging to an unknown person picking it up and taking it out of the scene. It's not clear what the producers of the film were implying by showing this visualization, but it certainly seems to hint at some sort of conspiracy. The scene then cuts back to Adam Shand interviewing former detective Chris O'Connor, and Shand states the 1985 survivor in her statement believes the assailant left evidence and swabs were taken. "Do you think if they are around they could still be tested?" Chris O'Connor replies. "They could certainly be matched if they were still in existence." What is unclear about this exchange is whether the swabs taken from the 1985 Hampton victim are still in existence or not. The placing of this scene in which the question is put to O'Connor by Shand just after the scene in which Keith Moore has described the police losing evidence is odd indeed. But it's not clear what the intention was here, since it was never verified that the swabs taken from the 1985 Hampton victim were also lost. The viewer then is left to decide for themselves as to whether A, the swabs were still in existence, and B, there was some sort of conspiracy that led to police evidence being lost in this case. Furthermore, what that conspiracy might be in the latter case is never dealt with. Neither Keith Moore's article nor Shand's documentary state what month in 1985 the attack on the 14-year-old girl occurred, but we can deduce that it occurred in February 1985, because Moore's article states that the next attack attributed to Mr. Cruel was that of a 14-year-old boy, occurred on July 1985, 5 months after the attack on the 14-year-old Hampton schoolgirl. And this matches up with the date given by Sylvester and Rule in their own discussion of the same attack. Keith Moore, in his article for the Herald Sun titled "Victoria Police and FBI Dossier on Shocking Child Abductions," dated 8th of April 2012. I didn't know we had an FBI. What is the FBI doing here? Dated the 8th... Okay, goes into detail about an attack on a 14-year-old boy that also allegedly occurred in Hampton in 1985. Another unsolved attack in Hampton, Bill's stamping ground, at the time bore many of the hallmarks of a Mr. Cruel attack, except it was on a 14-year-old boy. Experts say with such offenders, it is often more about control and power over victims rather than what sex the victim is. The schoolboy was abducted from his Hampton home about 8:25 p.m. on July 1985, 5 months after the abduction of the 14-year-old Hampton schoolgirl. He was held captive and assaulted in unknown premises for just over 3 hours before being released in Caulfield South about 11:45 p.m. The person named Bill here is a pseudonym Keith Moore gave to one of the main suspects in the case, who was later named by Channel 9 as Brian Allen Enkler. This, however, was a mistake. His actual surname is Elkner. Also, Moore was incorrect in stating that Hampton was Bill's stamping ground at the time. In fact, Elkner had already moved to Thornbury in March of that year. But, yep, no, they'll still try and pin it on someone. Anyway, I could find no reference to this attack in the newspaper articles of the day, either in local newspapers or The Age, The Sun News, Pictorial, or The Herald. Okay, so, and the next ones, they go into the older women, which for some reason, I think this man prefers children, and I think what has been done here is to try and tie other ones to Mr. Cruel. I don't know whether it's to try and confuse the situation or yeah, what they've done, to be honest. But to me, it just does not really make a lot of sense that he was the same person who did all these other ones. So, okay, I will probably leave it there. But I just wanted to point out the few things that they said about him, that he used surgical tape, that he seemed to know not to leave forensic evidence lying around. There was also a connection to of two of the girls to a school. Yeah, I find that very interesting, and the Victorian police are not releasing all the information. So that also makes me think that this could be somebody high up, like maybe in the medical field or somebody important anyway. And they normally do that, like as you look at the JonBenet Ramsey case, it's the same thing. Don't try and be a hero. They left that on the letter, that when JonBenet Ramsey was taken, I'm pretty sure that was on the letter of that. But the same thing with the first police that are there. They do not seal off the house, the area, for forensics. Even I am a normal person, and even I know that that's the first thing you would do. You would have one person maybe go through the house just to quickly, or try and look from the outside. No, you'd have some person looking, one police officer possibly, going through the house but knowing where he has tread and not touching anything. And as soon as he comes back out, he should seal that off and wait for forensics to get there. So let me know what you think down below, guys. And do you know that about, like, if something happens in a house where someone goes missing or they're murdered, the first thing you do is seal it off, the scene of the crime, so that forensics can get in there and get any evidence that they need that could help solve the case. I also believe in releasing the details to the public, as I said before, because there are a lot of good detectives, or armchair detectives, keyboard detectives, however you want to put it. There are a lot of really, and like they say, two heads are better than one. Well, how many can we get together? And, you know, more people looking into this, the better. Okay, guys, you can let me know what you think down below. Have a good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, guys, bye.